Pay the rent or get out. That was my father's voice breaking the stillness of a morning that had started like all the others. Quiet, predictable, and bound by routine. His words struck harder than any slammed door or raised fist could. The kitchen clock ticked, once then seemed to hold its breath. I stood there, coffee cup halfway to my lips, and for a moment I thought I had misheard. But he repeated it slower this time, drawing out each syllable like a verdict. Pay the rent or get out. You don't forget words like that. They carve themselves into your memory, neat as letters on a gravestone. And the strangest part was that he had no idea, none at all, that I was the rightful owner of the very house he was trying to throw me out of. But let me back up, because the story makes more sense when you know the morning routine, the sounds and the silences that had filled that old house long before this explosion. Every morning began at 6 sharp. I'd hear the clatter of dishes downstairs, the refrigerator door slamming shut, the hiss of the coffee maker. I lived on the 2nd floor, in what had once been my old bedroom, now sparsely decorated, more functional than homely. The window overlooked the maple tree I used to climb as a kid, its branches now heavier, just like me. My father, Earl, was 78 then. His joints stiffened by the year, his temper by the day. He still believed himself the master of the house, even though the truth was very different. He had fallen into the habit of treating me not as his daughter, but as a tenant. Each month, like clockwork, he demanded I pay my share. I did, though the irony was sharp enough to choke me. That morning, his anger brewed earlier than usual. He was waiting in the kitchen when I came down his coffee, steaming a folded sheet of paper spread neatly in front of him like evidence. I didn't need to unfold it to know what it was. Another utility bill. Another reason for him to lecture me about responsibility, about adulthood, about how nothing in this world was free. You think money grows on trees? He barked, tapping the bill with his knuckle. You're 38 years old, Ray. You don't get a free ride. Pay the rent or pack your things. I remember the way the morning sun fell across the table, dust motes dancing in the air as if nothing out of the ordinary had been said. My coffee had gone cold in my hand, but I sipped it anyway, just to give myself a second to breathe. Inside, my heart wasn't pounding. That surprised me. It was steady calm, like I'd been expecting this moment all along. I pay every month, I said, setting my cup down. You know I do. His face flushed. Not enough. Costs keep going up, Ray. Heat taxes, groceries. Don't you dare stand there and tell me you're paying your way. You want to live under this roof, you start carrying your weight. Our eyes locked across that faded oak table, mine steady, his clouded by frustration and something else, fear. Maybe, though, he'd never admit it. I thought of the file folder tucked away in my desk upstairs, the deed, the receipts, the closing statement from the bank, proof black and white that I owned every brick, every board of this house. Proof he never bothered to ask about because he always assumed the roof over his head was his birthright. But what do you do in a moment like that? Do you slam the papers on the table and shout, "This house is mine," or do you swallow the words, let him believe his illusion a little longer, and plan quietly in the shadows? I chose the latter. I rinsed my coffee cup in the sink, the warm water rushing over my fingers. My father muttered behind me, still railing, still convinced that he was the one in control. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply dried the cup, set it back in the cupboard, and walked out of the kitchen. In the hallway, the air was cooler, calmer. The old house creaked as I climbed the stairs. With each step, I felt the decision hardening in me like cooling steel. If he wanted me out, he was going to get his wish, but not in the way he imagined. Because the truth was simple, I had already decided that his words, cruel as they were, would be the last rent demand I'd ever entertain. By the end of that month, the house wouldn't belong to him anymore, not even in his mind. It would belong to a new owner, someone who had no memory of family dinners, no attachment to the walls, no illusions about who had built what. A stranger with a checkbook. And my father would learn the truth in the coldest way possible through paperwork. The kind of paperwork that arrives in a plain envelope posted to the front door carrying the weight of law behind it. The kind of paperwork you can't argue with. The kind of paperwork that doesn't shout, it simply states. That morning, I closed my bedroom door, sat at my desk, and pulled open the bottom drawer. The folder was right where I'd left it. Deed. Loan statements. Paid in full. My name alone on every line that mattered. I spread the papers out on the desk, the sunlight streaming across them like a spotlight. My father's voice still echoed downstairs, grumbling, angry, unaware. And I thought, if he wants me out, I'll give him exactly what he asked for. But on my terms. That was the morning it began, the morning my father yelled, "Pay the rent or get out." He thought he was giving me an ultimatum. But really, he was giving me permission. People like to say houses hold memories. Laughter in the walls, footsteps in the floors, echoes of arguments that never quite die out. This house was no different. But beneath the memories, beneath the wallpaper and the old wiring, it also held a secret one that not even my father suspected. He thought of it as his house, the place he worked for, the place he provided the roof that defined his authority. In truth, it was mine. Bought, paid for, and recorded in my name down at the county clerk's office. The story of how that happened isn't flashy, but it's important, because nothing makes sense without knowing how I ended up the owner of the very home my father believed was his kingdom. I'd worked hard since I was 18. While my friends were drifting from one odd job to another, I went straight into steady employment. Long hours, double shifts, night classes at the community college. I saved every check, every tax refund. I lived in a cramped apartment over a laundromat, the kind where the smell of detergent seeped into your clothes. My idea of a splurge was a takeout pizza once a month. Meanwhile, my father was burning through money faster than he admitted. He worked, yes, but there were always expenses, always repairs, always excuses. By the time my mother passed, the house had already been refinanced, twice the mortgage dragging like an anchor. When the bank started circling, I stepped in. Not with grand speeches, but with quiet checks. I paid off the late fees, covered the arrears, and eventually made the down payment myself when the bank threatened foreclosure. I can still see the clerk's raised eyebrow when she slid the papers across the counter. "Are you sure you want this solely in your name?" she asked. "Yes," I said, steady as stone. "Solely." The ink dried on the deed in 2010. The house was mine. I didn't tell him. How could I? Pride was the only thing he had left, and ripping it out of his hands seemed cruel. He'd always thought of himself as the provider, the patriarch. To confess that his daughter had quietly saved the family home out from under him, it would have broken him, or worse, made him bitter enough to destroy what remained of our relationship. So I stayed silent. I let him strut around, boasting to neighbors about how his house was finally secure. I let him complain about the mortgage, even though there was none. I let him believe he was paying the bills, while in reality, the money came from my account every month, disguised, rerouted, folded into the fiction we both lived in. But secrets are heavy. Every year the weight grew. I remember one night, in particular winter of 2014, I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting receipts. My father shuffled in slippers, dragging, and eyed the stack of papers. "Always working on something," he muttered. "Good to see you taking responsibility." I nodded, hiding the closing statement at the bottom of the pile. "Somebody has to," I said quietly. He didn't hear me, or maybe he chose not to. Over the years, I built a little archive. Manila folders filled with proof wire transfers, cashier's checks, tax bills paid under my name, every receipt stamped and dated. I wasn't saving them to rub in his face. I was saving them because part of me knew this day would come. The day he'd demand rent. The day he'd forget or refuse to see that without me, this house would have been lost long ago. People often ask why children keep giving even when parents take without gratitude. The answer is complicated. Sometimes it's love, sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's just the old stubborn hope that maybe one day the scales will balance. For me, it was all of those things. I wanted to honor my mother's memory, to preserve the only place she ever called home. I wanted to protect my father, even when he didn't deserve it. And I wanted to believe that deep down, he knew what I'd done for him, even if he never said the words out loud. But if I'm honest, I also wanted control. Quiet, hidden control. Ownership gave me a kind of strength I'd never known before. Every time he barked orders, every time he criticized my choices, I had a secret weapon tucked in the drawer upstairs. This house is mine. I never said it aloud, but I thought it often. There were moments when I almost confessed, like the spring day when a pipe burst in the basement and Dad cursed about repair costs. I'd already written the check for the plumber, but when he asked how I could afford it, I bit my tongue. Or the time my brother came sniffing around for a loan and Dad promised him a cut of the equity if he behaved. I wanted to laugh in his face. What equity? The deed was mine, but I stayed silent, because silence was easier than war. Still, I kept every piece of paper. Proof not for him, but for me. A reminder that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't freeloading, that the sacrifices I'd made were real, written in black ink, notarized and sealed. That's why when he shouted at me to pay the rent or get out, I didn't crumble. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I just thought of that file drawer. The one that held 20 pounds of paper. 20 pounds of truth. And I realized something. I hadn't saved those receipts just for memory's sake. I'd saved them for this exact moment. Because one day, the weight of silence stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like a chain. That morning, as I closed the drawer, I felt the chain snap. The secret wasn't a burden anymore. It was a weapon. And I was ready to use it. The morning after his outburst, the house felt different, lighter in a way, as though the walls themselves knew a storm had passed and another was building. My father didn't speak to me at breakfast. He shoveled his oatmeal, tapped his spoon against the bowl, and muttered under his breath. The silence between us stretched so wide, I could almost hear the clock ticking from the next room. Then, just as I stood to rinse my cup, he struck again. "You've got until the end of the month," he said, his voice flat, as though he'd been rehearsing the line all night. "If you can't pay what I'm asking, you're out." I turned slowly, the plate still in my hand. His eyes were fixed on the table, not me. "How much are you asking?" I asked, though. My voice was calm, not fearful. 500 more. He pushed the words out like he was spitting nails. "That's what it costs. Heating, food, everything going up. Don't argue with me, Ray. Just do it, or you can find somewhere else to live." I set the plate down carefully in the sink. My reflection in the window above it stared back at me, pale, calm, and sharper than I'd ever seen it. "I'll think about it," I said. He scoffed. "Don't think too long." And just like that, the ultimatum was set. I walked outside to clear my head. The morning was crisp, the maple tree in the yard trembling in the breeze. Across the street, our neighbor Harper Dwight waved mower rumbling at his side. He was the kind of man who always had news to share whether you wanted it or not. "Morning, Ray," he called. "Did you hear the Browns are selling their place down the block? Asking almost $500,000. Crazy market, isn't it?" $500,000. The words rang in my ears. The Browns' house was smaller than ours. Older roof, fewer updates, and they were asking close to $500,000. I forced a polite smile. I hadn't heard I said. "Well, you tell your dad if he ever thinks about selling, I've got a brother-in-law who's a realtor. Could get you a good deal. Houses like yours don't sit long these days." I nodded, thanked him, and went back inside. But the number followed me. $500,000. In my room, I sat down at my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder. The deed, the statements, the stack of receipts, all mine. My fingers lingered on the embossed seal at the bottom of the deed. Legal binding, undeniable. That's when the idea rooted itself firmly. Not just to defend myself, not just to prove him wrong, but to end the charade once and for all. Sell the house. Take the equity, the peace, the freedom. Let the papers speak louder than words ever could. I didn't rush. I took the rest of the day to weigh it. The kitchen smelled of coffee, the radiator hissed, and I let the sound of the house wash over me. Every corner of it was familiar. My childhood room, the basement, where I once helped Dad fix a busted fuse. The porch where Mom used to sip iced tea on summer evenings. Selling would mean letting go of more than walls. It meant letting go of illusions. But the longer I thought, the clearer it became. This house hadn't been a home for years. It had become a battlefield, a stage where my father's pride clashed with my silence, a place where my generosity was twisted into debt. That night, I sat at my desk and drafted an email. A realtor's name came easily. Raymond Prescott, recommended by a coworker who had sold her condo through him. His reputation was solid, professional, discreet. The subject line was simple: interested in selling my home. His reply came the next morning, courteous, efficient. He suggested a meeting at a local cafe away from the neighborhood. I agreed. Raymond was exactly the kind of man you want in your corner-sharp suit. Easy smile, but eyes that missed nothing. He shook my hand firmly, slid a business card across the table, and listened without interruption as I explained. I want to sell quickly, I told him. Clean deal. No fuss. And it has to stay quiet. My family doesn't know I own the property. He raised his brows slightly, but didn't pry. That's not unusual, he said. We can handle it through standard process. Cash buyers are common right now. If we price it right, it'll move fast. What's the right price, I asked. Given the market and the condition you've described, we can list around $480, maybe $490. But if you want it quick, I'd expect offers in the $470 range. $470,000. I nodded, my throat dry. That number wasn't just money. It was independence. A clean slate. I'll accept $470, I said. No less. Understood. He slid a folder toward me. If you're ready, we can sign a broker agreement today. Photos listing. Showings, it'll all be handled professionally. Buyers usually need 30 days after closing to take possession, but we can set that expectation up front. I scanned the forms, then signed. My name flowed across the page, steady, undeniable. And with that, the wheels were in motion. That night, I returned home to the same house I'd always known, but it felt different. The walls seemed to hum with a secret. My father sat in the living room TV, flickering across his tired face. He didn't notice me pause in the doorway. I studied him, his lined forehead, the stubborn set of his jaw. Once he had been strong. Once he had been the man I admired. But time and bitterness had changed him. Upstairs, I locked my door, spread the signed papers across the desk, and let myself exhale. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I told myself that again and again. This was survival, boundaries. The only way to reclaim the life I'd worked for without shouting, without fighting, without begging to be treated fairly. He had given me an ultimatum: pay, more rent, or leave. I had made my decision. I would leave, but not before making sure he understood the truth. Not before every illusion he clung to was stripped away by the only thing he couldn't argue with: paperwork. The first thing Raymond did was send over the broker agreement for me to review. I opened it late at night, alone at my desk, the house hushed except for the steady hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The language was dense: square footage, disclosures, commission percentages, but every line carried the same meaning. Once I signed, the secret was no longer just mine. It was a transaction. I clicked the e-signature button, and the cursor felt heavier than any pen I'd ever held. My name appeared in bold digital ink at the bottom of the page. Done. The very next morning, the process began to move faster than anger, faster than doubt. Raymond arranged for photos. A young woman with a camera arrived one weekday while Dad was out grocery shopping. She had soft sneakers that barely made a sound on the hardwood floors. "Beautiful light in here," she murmured as she snapped shots of the living room sun spilling across the carpet. She captured the porch, the kitchen, even the maple tree out front. All the places that held our history now flattened into glossy rectangles destined for an online listing. I stood to the side, hands folded as though I were watching strangers catalog a museum I had secretly curated. Within 48 hours, the listing went live. I didn't look at it directly, but I could feel its presence humming in the background like a live wire. A house on Maple Drive, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, asking price $489,000, open to offers. The first showing happened the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. I slipped Raymond a spare key so he could let himself in. When I came home from work, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and someone else's cologne. A stranger had stood in our kitchen. A stranger had peeked into my father's bedroom. And yet nothing seemed out of place. Raymond was good at his job. By the end of that week, offers started trickling in. One was too low, almost insulting. Another came with a laundry list of demands, repairs, credits, a new roof inspection. Raymond dismissed them with a polite shake of his head. Then came the one that mattered $470,000. Clean. Conventional financing. No contingencies beyond the standard inspection. 30-day close. Raymond's voice over the phone was calm but firm. This is the one, Ray. It's not flashy, but it's solid. These buyers want a home, not a bargaining chip. I took a long breath. $470,000. Exactly the number I had set in my mind. Exactly the price of freedom. Accept it, I said. Done, he replied. And just like that, escrow opened. The inspection was almost anticlimactic. A few minor notes: the gutters needed cleaning. The water heater was aging. The buyers requested a small credit, but Raymond pushed back. The house is sold as is, he told their agent. Take it or leave it. They took it. I watched the paper trail unfold. Disclosures, signed earnest money, deposited, title search, cleared. Each email was a nail in the coffin of illusion, sealing the truth beneath layers of official seals and digital timestamps. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, while Dad dozed in his recliner TV, muttering to itself. I flipped through the stack of printed documents, the legalese forming a chorus of certainty. Sale pending. Buyer financing approved. Estimated closing date circled in bold. The walls seemed to lean in around me, listening. With the contract in place, the buyer's property manager prepared the notice. That was the part that chilled me, the efficiency of it all. There was no shouting, no arguing, no debate. Just a document printed on crisp white paper, folded, slipped into an envelope, and marked for delivery. Raymond explained it gently. Once the sale closes, they'll serve a 30-day notice to vacate. Standard procedure, nothing personal. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. Nothing personal. That was the phrase that stung most. Families break apart with words like that, business terms replacing blood ties. Still, I insisted on one thing. The notice has to be respectful. No drama. Just the law, plain and clear. He agreed. That weekend, I began packing small things. Not enough for Dad to notice, just keepsakes that mattered to me. Mom's recipe box. A few photo albums, the quilt she stitched during her last winter. I slid them into a cardboard box and tucked it in my closet. It wasn't fear that drove me, but a quiet readiness. Downstairs, Dad grumbled about utility costs, again waving a bill in the air. I let his words drift past me like smoke. He had no idea the house was already spoken for, that the very walls around him now carried someone else's name in the eyes of the law. He had no idea the paper he waved in frustration was nothing compared to the paper waiting to arrive. On Tuesday, the envelope came. I heard the courier's footsteps on the porch, the soft scrape of paper sliding through the mail slot. The sound was ordinary, almost forgettable, but to me, it was thunder. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the envelope on the floor. My name wasn't on it anymore. Neither was his. It was addressed to current occupant. Cold, impersonal, final. I picked it up, the weight of it far heavier than the single sheet inside. The edges cut slightly into my fingers as I carried it to the kitchen table. Dad looked up from his recliner, frowning. "What's that?" "Mail," I said softly. He had no idea what he was about to unfold. No idea that the paperwork had already outpaced his anger, his demands, his pride. And once he read it, there would be no going back. He was in the kitchen when I slid the envelope across the table. The paper made a soft scrape against the wood, the sound sharp as a knife in the silence of the house. "What's this?" he asked, suspicion narrowing his eyes. "Open it," I said, my voice steady. He frowned, tore the flap with a thick thumb, and unfolded the single sheet inside. His lips moved as he read. Once. Twice. then a third time slower, as though the words might change if he gave them another chance. Notice to vacate. 30 days after closing, the premises must be surrendered to the new owner. His face drained of color. He looked up at me, confusion flickering into something darker. "What kind of joke is this?" he barked. "It's not a joke," I said quietly. "The house is sold." "Sold!" His chair screeched against the tile as he shoved it back. "You're telling me some stranger owns this place now? After all these years, you expect me to believe that?" I folded my hands on the table steady. "It's not a matter of belief, Dad. It's a matter of paperwork." He paced the kitchen, muttering curses under his breath. He slammed the refrigerator door shut, yanked it open again as if the cold air could clear his head. "I've paid the bills. I've kept this place running. You can't just—" He stopped clutching the notice in his hand. "Who even owns it? Some bank, some developer." The truth sat on my tongue like a hot coal. I wasn't ready to spit it out yet. Not until the right moment. "All you need to know," I said, "is that the new owner wants possession. You've got 30 days. His hand trembled as he waved the paper. "This is nonsense. I'll call the realtor. I'll call the city. I'll call." "You can call whoever you like," I cut in, my voice firmer now. "It won't change the law." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then his face crumpled into something I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not authority, but raw fear. "What am I supposed to do? Ray?" His voice cracked. "Where am I supposed to go?" I wanted to feel sympathy. Part of me did. He was old, set in his ways, too proud to rent an apartment, too stubborn to move in with anyone else. But another part of me remembered all the years of silence, the demands, the constant weight of being treated like a guest in the very house I'd saved. "You'll figure it out," I said gently but firmly. "You always do." He slumped into his chair, the notice clutched like a death sentence. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his shoulders smaller. For once, the man who had always commanded every room sat wordless, powerless. That night, the house was unbearably quiet. No TV blaring, no muttered complaints, just the sound of him pacing floorboards, creaking under his slippers as he read the notice again and again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening, my heart steady but heavy. In the morning, he was waiting by the phone. His hands hovered over it, then dropped, then hovered again. Finally, he dialed. I watched from the doorway as he spoke to the realtor's office. His voice was tight, trembling. "There's been a mistake," he said. "I'm the owner of this house. I didn't authorize any sale." I could hear the tinny voice on the other end, polite but firm. Explaining procedure, explaining signatures, explaining that ownership was a matter of record, not memory. Dad's face sagged as the truth seeped in. His free hand balled into a fist, then opened helpless. He hung up, stared at the wall for a long time, and finally turned to me. "Ray," he said slowly, "do you know anything about this?" It was the opening I had been waiting for. I met his gaze unblinking. "Yes." His eyes widened. "You? What do you mean, you?" "I mean, I know exactly what's happening," I said. "I know because I arranged it." For a moment, he looked like I had struck him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no sound came. Finally, he rasped, "You sold my house." "No," I corrected. My voice was calm, clear, steady as stone. "I sold my house." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. He pushed himself up, gripping the edge of the table for support. "You're lying. You're trying to trick me. My name has always been on this place." "Check the deed," I said simply. His eyes darted toward the desk in the corner, toward the file drawer he never opened. His face twisted with something between disbelief and fury. You went behind my back. You stole it." "I saved it," I said. My voice rose slightly for the first time. "When the bank was ready to take it, when you couldn't make the payments, I stepped in. I put my name on the deed. I've been paying ever since." His mouth worked soundlessly. The paper shook in his hand. "You should be thanking me," I added quietly. but instead, you've been charging me rent in my own house." He dropped back into the chair, head in his hands. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The kitchen clock ticked relentless. Finally, he lifted his head, eyes wet with something I wasn't sure was anger or shame. "So it's true." "It's true. And now you've sold it out from under me." "Yes," I said, "because you told me to leave. And I did." His breath came ragged, shallow. He looked 10 years older in that moment. "Where will I go?" he whispered. I didn't answer. Not yet. That answer had to come later when the papers closed and the movers arrived. For now, the silence was enough. The notice sat between us on the table, stark black letters on white paper. Not a shout, not a threat, but the simple, undeniable truth. The house was no longer his. It never had been. The phone rang just after noon. I was in my room packing another box of belongings, small things books, mostly when I heard his voice downstairs. It wasn't the usual bark or grumble. It was frantic, almost pleading. Ray, come down here. It's urgent." I set the box aside and walked slowly to the kitchen. He was standing by the phone, the notice unfolded on the counter beside him like a guilty verdict. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "They called me," he said. "The new owners. They said they expect me out in 30 days. 30 days!" His voice cracked. "I can't do this. I don't have anywhere to go." I pulled out a chair, sat down across from him, and folded my hands. "Dad, you knew this was coming." "No!" He slammed his fist against the counter. "I didn't know. How could I know? You tricked me. Ray, you tricked your own father." I met his eyes steadily. "I didn't trick you. I told you the truth. This was never your house. It was mine. I bought it years ago. Paid for it. Every penny." He shook his head violently. "Lies. All lies." His voice softened, trembling. "Why would you do this to me?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had rehearsed silently for years. "Because you demanded I pay rent or get out. You treated me like a tenant. You gave me no choice. So I got out. I sold the house, Dad." The words hung heavy between us. He leaned against the counter, staring at me like I was a stranger. "I built my life in these walls," he said, his voice cracking. "I raised you here, buried your mother from here, and now you've ripped it away." I swallowed hard. His pain was real, but so was mine. "You don't remember the nights when the bank was ready to foreclose," I said quietly. "When you were drowning in debt and I stepped in. You don't remember the checks I wrote, the signatures I signed. You don't remember because you didn't want to. But I saved this house, Dad. Not you, me." His breathing quickened. He clutched the edge of the counter for support. "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because pride was all you had left," I whispered. "And I didn't want to take that away from you. Until you forced my hand." The silence stretched until the phone rang again. The shrill sound cut through the air like a blade. He flinched, then grabbed the receiver. "Hello?" His voice trembled. "Yes, this is Earl Morgan. Please, there's been some mistake. This is my house. I've lived here all my life. You can't just—" He froze. I could hear the muffled reply, calm, professional, unwavering. Then slowly, like a balloon deflating, his shoulders sagged. "I see," he whispered. I understand." He hung up, stared at the wall for a long moment, then turned to me. His eyes were wet, but his voice carried a new edge. "You've humiliated me," he said bitterly. "In front of strangers. In front of my own neighbors. You've destroyed me." I didn't flinch. "No, Dad. You destroyed yourself the moment you demanded rent from me in a house I owned. You treated me like a burden, not a daughter. I just stopped playing along." He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, not with anger this time, but with something deeper. Panic, shame, fear. I let the moment breathe. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Outside, the maple tree rustled in the breeze. Life went on indifferent to our private war. Finally, he lifted his head. "What am I supposed to do now?" I held his gaze. Find another place, a smaller house, an apartment, something you can actually afford. You've got a pension. You'll be fine. He shook his head. I can't. I don't know how. I've never. His voice broke again. I've never lived anywhere else. My chest tightened. Despite everything, despite the years of coldness, he was still my father. Still the man who once held my hand crossing the street, who built me a treehouse with his calloused hands. But he was also the man who had shouted, "Pay the rent or get out." I stood, picked up the notice, and placed it back in his trembling hands. You said those words to me, I reminded him softly. Now you understand what they feel like. His jaw clenched. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. You'll regret this, he muttered. Maybe, I said, but not as much as I'd regret staying silent forever. For a long time, he didn't move. The house creaked around us, old bones shifting in the wind. Finally, he looked back at me, his eyes not angry now, but hollow searching. Do you hate me, Ray? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, Dad, I don't hate you. I just couldn't keep carrying your pride on my back. The phone rang again, startling both of us. He didn't answer this time. He just sat there, the notice clutched in his hand as though it were the only thing tethering him to reality. And I knew in that moment the illusion was shattered. The house was no longer his. It had never been. But the hardest part wasn't the sale. It wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't even his panic. The hardest part was knowing I'd finally spoken the truth aloud, and that once spoken, there was no taking it back. The closing took place on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day that can't decide between sun and clouds. Raymond met me in a small conference room that smelled faintly of copier, toner, and lemon cleaner. Papers were stacked in tidy piles. Blue flags marked the places for signatures like breadcrumbs across the forest of legalese. I signed where he pointed, initials here, full name, there the pen, skating over the glossy surfaces with a whisper. The wire confirmation chimed on his laptop screen, a small sound that carried more finality than any gavel strike. Congratulations, Raymond said, offering a professional, measured smile. Recordation will hit by morning. Possession follows the notice as discussed. Thank you, I replied, and meant it. His efficiency had been a buffer between me and the conflict. He had kept everything in the realm of process, where feelings could not overturn filings. On the way out, I paused. One last favor, I said. Make sure the buyers know I'll facilitate a cash for keys arrangement if needed. Not because I have to, because it's right. He nodded, already in motion. The door clicked softly behind me. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, the light looked different. Not brighter, not darker, just steadier, as if the world had leveled out by a degree. Back at the house, I found Dad at the kitchen table with the notice in front of him, the edges softened from being handled too much. The afternoon light came in low through the window, turning dust into floating sequins. He didn't look up when I walked in. He had a legal pad in front of him, a column of numbers written with a heavy hand and then crossed out, rewritten, crossed out again. Beside the pad lay his old pocket knife, open as if he'd started to pick at something that wouldn't yield. I set an envelope on the table. It was thick, the flap sealed. I slid it toward him with 2 fingers. What's this? He asked, voice hoarse. Open it. He tore the flap and tipped the contents onto the table. A spare key, a simple printed lease for a 1-bedroom apartment a mile from the barber. He liked a receipt for 3 months prepaid rent, a note from a senior services coordinator who could help with utilities and transportation, and a small folded sheet listing moving companies with fair rates, each name vetted and starred. I don't want, he began, then stopped. The key glinted on the wood. It isn't charity, I said quietly. It's logistics. 30 days is faster than feelings. This will help you move without the sheriff having to come post anything else. His throat worked. You think I need a babysitter? I think you need a plan, I said. And this is one. A good one. He picked up the key and turned it in his palm, as if testing its weight. For a long moment, the only sound was the refrigerator's hum. Finally, he set the key down and pushed the lease toward me with 2 fingers. "You signed for me?" he asked, wary. "No," I said. "It's your name. Month to month. I covered the first 3. After that, it's yours to decide. Stay or find another place. You're not trapped, Dad. You're just moving." He stared at the page, and something in his face shifted, less panic, more age. He looked smaller, not from defeat exactly, but from having finally put down a burden he had carried too long, pretending it was a crown. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he whispered. "I don't know if I need you to." I answered, not unkindly. "Forgiveness is a long road. We can start with honesty." His eyes lifted to mine, red-rimmed, searching for a fight that wasn't there. Finding none, he let out a breath that seemed to come from years back. "Your mother would have said I deserved this," he said, a sad, crooked half-smile pulling at one corner of his mouth. "She was a fair woman." "She was," I said softly. "This?" I gestured to the envelope, the list, the key is me trying to be 2. He nodded once. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile. But we didn't raise our voices either. Sometimes that's what a truce looks like, 2 people choosing not to pick up the old weapons. The move happened on a Saturday. The sky was the color of folded denim, a breeze lifting the maple leaves and setting them whispering. The movers were quick and gentle, wrapping his chair in padded blankets, boxing his books with practiced hands. I labeled each box with a thick black marker in block letters, kitchen, bedroom, bath, radio. When I wrote radio, he glanced up and our eyes met. I remembered the nights he tuned in to ball games, the tinny jubilance of faraway crowds, the static punctuating disappointment. He had taught me how to fix the old set. One soldering iron steady hand patience, 3 things I still carried. He lingered over one photograph, Mom on the porch, her elbow on the rail, chin in her hand, laughing at something just out of frame. He slipped the photo into his jacket pocket without a word, and I was glad for the silence. At the apartment, the building manager met us at the door, a cheerful woman with a clipboard and a sympathy that didn't curdle into condescension. She showed him the thermostat first, then the wide shower with the grab bar, then the pantry with the built-in shelves. Simple, clean, manageable. Not a prison. A beginning. He tested the thermostat, eyes narrowing. "It actually holds the setting," he asked. "It does?" the manager said with a smile. 71 will be 71. He looked at me, the faintest hint of rue in his gaze. We both understood the joke without saying it. When we left him there, the small living room arranged the radio on the side table, the lease clipped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a baseball. He followed us to the door. He put his hand on the frame, the way people do when they mean to say more than their mouths will allow. "Ray," he said, not quite a question, not quite a statement. "I'll call tomorrow," I replied, "to check on the utilities, to make sure the kettle boils." He nodded. That was the size of it. We did not erase the past, but we wrote the next line with a finer pen. I spent my first night in the little place I'd rented for myself across town. The walls were freshly painted, the windows tight against the draft, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like someone holding their breath, but like a lake at dawn. I set the thermostat to 71 and didn't have to defend it. I unpacked a single box, the recipe cards in Mom's looping hand, the photo albums, the quilt. I brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon, and for the first time in years, I let the lamp burn until I was done reading instead of until someone told me to turn it off. It wasn't triumph, it was relief. I thought of the line I had promised myself I would hold, the one I'd written in my head 100 times: I don't raise my voice. I raised documents. In the end, it had been true. Paper had done what shouting never could. It had set a boundary without drawing blood. People think revenge is fire and theater. Sometimes it's a file folder, a firm signature, a key laid on a table with a note that says, "Here is the next right thing." Sometimes it's a door closing softly in a house where doors used to slam. The next morning, the sun came in low and made a gold ladder across the floorboards. I stood in it a minute, bare feet, warm coffee hot in my hands, and listened to the steady tick of an honest clock. I texted Avery the new address. Anytime I wrote. She sent back a heart and a picture of the sky from her bus stop, blue breaking through, overcast. "Looks like weather's changing," she wrote. "It is," I typed. "Finally." If you've walked this far with me through the paperwork and the quiet rooms, through the notices and the necessary goodbyes, maybe you've carried a heavy secret too. Maybe you've kept the peace so long you forgot you were allowed to keep yourself. If this story helped you breathe a little easier, share it with someone who needs a steady hand more than a loud voice. Subscribe if you'd like to hear the next chapter when I'm ready to tell it. And take care of your boundaries tonight. Set your thermostat where you sleep best.